Dan here, MaxSPL Videos, and I was on the internet. So let's talk about subwoofers and if you should space them out or not. So what the heck am I getting at? Well, I was recently on a Facebook group, which is normally mistake number one, but it happens to be a pretty good Facebook group. And they joined in on the never-ending discussion of, should you space your subwoofers or not? There were some people saying, you should always make sure your subwoofers are right next to each other. You get the best sound that way. Other people who've been saying, I've been spacing my subwoofers out for years and I've never had a problem with them. What is the actual answer? Well, let me summarize it all for you. This is, I'm sorry, objectively true. It is almost always better to have your subwoofers next to each other if you can. If you choose to space them out, either for looks or because it's just the best way to arrange them for the venue, it is going to be not as good, but it is going to probably be fine for 90% of you. That's kind of it. That's the long, that's the short. Optimal, close to each other. Suboptimal, but usable, is spaced. That's it. But let me show my work a little bit. This here is a program called Ease Focus 3. And I'm just using the free version of it that came with a dual 18 subwoofer just to show this. And what I've done is I've put one in a room that is 110 by 60, which is your average gymnasium or basketball court, give or take, at least according to Google. And we've got a pretty decent little spread going here. As you can see, as you get closer to the back of the room, it gets quieter. As you stay closer to the subwoofer, it's louder. Who knew? Now, this isn't perfectly omnidirectional at 63 hertz. The lower you go, right, if I go down to 31, it's quite a bit more omni. If you go up to 125, it's getting more and more cardioid, shall we say. So do keep that in mind. Most subwoofers should respond roughly this way. And this isn't accounting for reflections on the walls and room modes and things like that. But just pure raw in a void, this is what we're looking at 63 hertz, 1 octave bandwidth. Cool. We want more volume. So you've got two options. One is you can add more volume. Now, if you can look down here underneath me, you will see 84.9 for our average. And then we have 79.3, 90.6 for our minimum and max. And then they have plus and minus standard deviation stuff if you want to see those numbers too. And let's do this. So we add 6 dB. Everything goes up by 6. Average 90.9. Volume is volume. If you add 6 dB volume, your volume goes up by 6 dB. The average volume follows because your minimum and your max both tick up in the almost exact same way. That can change due to reflections and things like that and blah, blah, blah. But again, this is just generally how it works. Volume is volume. Now, somebody out there is thinking, well, why not bring the second subwoofer out? Because then I'll fill the room more. I'll get more sound. That depends. Because if I add a second subwoofer, right, let's drop this back to 0. Zoom in. Copy. Paste. Line them up. Equal spacing. Let's start with just a few feet apart. Ooh, these subwoofers technically can't do this because they are too big. But, look at that. We've got a nice fill there. And, hey, all of our numbers went up by about 6 dB. That's because when you double your sound source, you not only add the 3 decibels from doubling it, when it's a subwoofer, you get an extra free 3 decibels by coupling them. But as soon as I start spacing them, numbers start to get a little bit wonky. Because, again, some people will think, well, instead of just turning it up, why don't I space them out more? I'll get a better sound. Well, let's space these out. And a bunch of weirdness starts happening. They start to cancel each other out in certain spots. Okay, now, I saved us all some time. I did a bunch of moving this around, and here's what happened. I started average 84.9, and when I added 6 decibels to the gain, we got 90.6. Who knew? So just turning the volume knob up got me 6 dB. Having them close together got me just shy of 6 decibels. Our max went up by 6. Our minimum didn't go up by quite that. But as soon as we start spacing it out, the minimums start dropping. The max stays relatively the same. But as we start to drop it, as we start to space it, this happens. This is bad. You don't want this. If you're saying, oh, well, having the subwoofers spread out, I get a better sound because it's spread out throughout the room. No, it actually spreads out better if you have it coming from one source. You'll get a more linear sound throughout the room. It will sound better starting your subwoofers close. That said, if you're at a wedding and you have a small dance floor and you throw your subwoofers close-ish to each other, right? How much is this spaced by? This is, well, let's use this dot in the middle as a guide. This is the cones of the subwoofer spaced about 8 feet apart. Life goes on. Your dance floor is going to be nice and full. The area around it's going to be okay. Back of the room, still a little quieter. Who cares? That's kind of how it works. And these quiet spots are going to end up in spots we don't really care about either. Right? So if you're running like a 6-foot table, right? This is about, that's about 4 feet in between. Let's make it 6 feet. So move these each 1 foot over. Right? We got our 6-foot table, subwoofer on each side. This is fine. Right? It starts getting a little bit wonky at 125. So I would not recommend, if you're running a set of column arrays, to space them out this far, because your 200 or so hertz is going to start to sound a bit iffy. But general subwoofers, you're set. This is fine, right? The further out you go, the worse it's going to sound, though. You're going to start creating these weird dead spots, and you're going to actually end up, even though you think, I'm spreading it out, I'm going to get a more even sound, now your area in front, right, that you actually have people dancing at, starts getting real wonky. The back of the room is starting to get weird, right? It's just not ideal. I've heard some people on some other forums, this wasn't on the one I was talking about, talking about like aiming power alleys and stuff. Don't ever bother trying to do that. The room modes and reflections and stuff are going to make a lot of the math you might do ahead of time, even using a system like this, fall apart, and you're going to end up having to start from scratch anyway. So, long story short, as I said at the beginning, it is best to either have one subwoofer, be it a dual or a single or whatever the heck you want to do, turned up. That's going to get your best and most even results throughout the room. If you have 2 subwoofers, keeping them close together is going to get you, well, very close to running just like a dual 18 subwoofer in the center or something like that. And if you must space them out, bigger spacing is worse. Not only do you get less sound overall, right? You start to lose your max and your minimum, therefore your average. It's doing so in a really weird, nonlinear fashion. So, hope that helps. Hope that clears up some of the misconceptions around this stuff. Like I said, if you're spacing your subwoofers a bit because it looks better and you're running your tops on them and all that, you're fine. Your dance floor is going to be nice and full. It's going to be fairly linear out here in the areas you most need it. But it's just not as good as if you had those subwoofers directly next to each other. So just know that. Just know that. It doesn't matter. It's whatever works best for your system and for your setup. For column arrays, some of this gets a little jankier because the tops and the subs are attached and the crossover frequency is in a different spot. A lot of those were designed in a controlled environment, let's say, right? A lot of the ads for the early column arrays were a single column array with like a singer-songwriter and stuff. And that was for a reason. Is you have to be really careful with those in terms of how nice they play with each other. But again, if you have a 6-foot table, put one of those on each side and you're probably fine. If you can, tilt them out a little bit to try and cut down on the higher frequency comb filtering. Just have them kicked a little bit. You're probably okay. But let me know what you think. Hope this was useful. I hope my audio didn't clip out this time by having one of my gain stages set up a little incorrectly. Because I really want to finish this beer. But I'll see you in the next one.